Hi, I'm Jennifer with the Kentucky Agriculture and Environment in the Classroom, and this is our Soil Sense activity, which is part of our Feeding Kentucky STEM Adventure program. I think this is a really fun one because it tells students what soil is made up of, what properties a soil can have, and then why we need to protect the soil that we do have because it's a limited resource. What's interesting about this particular activity is that we have a different lesson for our 2nd and 5th graders than the lesson for the 3rd and the 4th graders. So one thing you might have to remember is how you explain things to a 2nd grader might be a lot different than how you explain to a 5th grader, but basically we want them to understand the different properties of the soil. So when you have your 2nd and 5th graders, when they come up, you can ask them, what is soil? And ask them what they think the definition is or what they think soil is made of. And a lot of times I hear dirt. And then I'll ask, well, what's dirt? And they're not really sure how to answer that. So you can say, well, soil is actually different sized particles of minerals and organic matter. And of course it has air and water in there as well. And we have several examples of that. But different soils can have different proportions or ratios of each of those different particles. So when we talk about mineral particles, those are going to be coming from the rock that's under the Earth's surface. And as it moves up and weathers, the particle size is going to change. The largest particle size is sand, and we do have an example of sand here. The next size particle is silt, and then the smallest is clay. So I showed you the sand. This soil right here is about half silt, half clay. This soil right here is mostly clay. And then the final soil ingredient is organic matter, and we'll have an example of some potting soil that you might get at the gardening center, and it's completely black and it's mostly all organic matter. And then we have this soil from Illinois that is much darker than the others, and this has a lot of organic matter in it as well. So they definitely have a lot of different soil types to choose from. You can then show them how we can determine how much sand, silt, clay, and organic matter is in a soil sample, and this is something they can do at home. So if you take a jar, a little mason jar, and fill it about halfway up with soil, and then top it off with some water, and you can add some salt to help it mix well and disperse well. After you put the soil and water in this jar, you can shake it up really good. We're not going to let them do that just because it does take a while for it to separate out. So they wouldn't get to see that immediately, but you can at least explain that they could do this at home. So we have a few examples that we've let sit for several hours, and they will be able to see the different layers in the soil. So this one goes along with the soil that came from Kentucky, the silty soil, and it's about half silt, half clay, and they can actually see those different layers. This is from the soil that came from Florida, and it is mostly sand, and there's a very small layer of organic matter or really dark clay at the very top there. And this is one that I made up just so they could see a lot more sand content, silt, and clay. So I added some sand to this one, and they can see the 3 different layers here. And then the organic matter is floating at the top. So what type of soil it is will help determine what crops can grow well. So grasses tend to grow better in a clay soil than some other crops do, like carrots and potatoes. They need to be able to spread out really easily, and they may not be able to do that in a clay soil. Citrus grows in that real sandy soil in Florida, so those plants may like that type of soil. So you can talk about those types of things. Color also tells a lot about a soil. We've got some color chips from the paint store, and you can give them a few of those and have them take turns matching the color of the soil, which is important for soil scientists. They have a more scientific way of doing that, but it helps them determine what processes are going on in the soil and also what minerals may be in that soil. Obviously, a soil that is more red will have some rust in it, some oxidized iron. So the color will help them determine what's going on in the soil. And then we can take that even further and test the pH, which is something a soil scientist would do. If you're going to plant a garden or crops on your property, you might send a soil sample in to the extension office and they may test it for pH. We have a few vials that we have ready for you to do this with the students. They can take turns picking a different vial and then pushing the button on the pH meter. And this one in particular is a 6.0, so that means it's slightly acidic. 7 is right in the middle, that's neutral. As opposed to this is a solution from a soil that's been sitting a while. And it's registering a 4.5, so that's very acidic compared to the other. And then here's a more clay soil. And it's a 6.0. And then we'll have a chart that they can look and see what plants might like to grow in those soils. So that would conclude the 2nd and 5th grade lesson. For our 3rd and 4th graders, we want to have the same conversation, what is soil made of, but then ask them, is it important that we protect our soil? And they may have different answers. Well, we have a limited resource in soil to grow our crops. You can show them the picture of this ground that is clearly the soil has been eroded, and you can ask them what do they think caused that. They have learned about erosion in 3rd grade, and this was caused by water erosion. And you can ask what other things cause erosion, and they might say wind. They have also learned about ice. But then ask them, where did it not erode? And obviously the soil is still intact in these grassy areas. Well, why is that the case? A lot of the kids know that it's because the roots have penetrated that soil and they're holding it together. And here we have a picture of that. And if you can ask them if they've ever seen, a plant in a pot, and if you want to replant the plant, if they pull it out, usually that soil is still all together in the pot, and it's because the roots are holding on to it. So it's really important when we have bare soil to cover it up to make sure that it doesn't move when we have a big rainstorm or a lot of wind blowing. So that goes into the next part of the lesson, which is how much of the Earth's surface do we have available for growing food. So you get out these cards and put in front of them, and this represents the Earth's surface. And then we got a little math going on in here as well. You may have to help your 3rd graders, but the 4th graders should be able to assign fractions to each of these sections. But water makes up 3/4 of our Earth's surface, so we cannot grow crops on that 3/4. And you can have these little fractions and they can assign those. So each one of these sections is a 1/4. There are 32 different blocks. So one block would be 1/32. So we've labeled the water. Next we have a section that is the North and South Poles, mountains, deserts. We can't grow food in those places either. And that is represented by 1/8, because that's half of a 1/4. The land we have to grow on is 1/4. Then we have an 1/8 left, but half of that is forests. And you can ask, is it important that we keep our forests? Well, absolutely. Forests provide us oxygen. They also take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they provide habitat. So we don't want to deforest any areas of the earth because they are important to us. But that represents 1/16 of our land. And we have another 1/16 left, but part of that is too dry, too rocky, it might be too wet, it might be populated with buildings. So we're not growing crops. Now on some of those marginal lands that are too rocky, you might be able to have grassland or forages, so you could put livestock on those areas. So we still can grow food on them, it's just in a different manner. So what do we have left? We have 1/32 of a hole that we can actually grow crops on. So then you can say, is it important to save our soil? Absolutely. We have a growing population. We're going to have more people. And then with more people, you're going to take up more room with houses and buildings and highways. So it's more important than ever to conserve our soil. Thank you so much for helping us teach this. Until next time.